Joe Stevens, a mid-level manager, regains consciousness in a strange triangular pit surrounded by concrete walls. With no bridges or casinos nearby, he realizes this is definitely not Los Angeles. Amid the few landmarks in the center is a stone millstone in a circular groove. Joe knocks on an iron door nearby, seeking answers about his peculiar whereabouts. However, there's silence from inside. Suddenly, voices from his neighboring concrete pits politely ask him to be quiet. Only one unfortunate neighbor through a ventilation grill explains that Joe was drugged before being brought here, and now he's in for some simple days. When his conversational partner leaves for work, Joe attempts to jump his way out, but to no avail. Suddenly, a dry piece of bread and a bottle of water slide through a gap in the door. Joe rushes to the door, pleading with the guard to let him out. He insists he's a manager, not a laborer, and shouldn't be here, but the enforcer is unyielding and strikes Joe's hand with a baton. With his damaged limb wrapped in a tie, Joe reluctantly awaits further developments while sustaining himself with the dry bread. At 10:30 in the evening, the Mellord Company's projection comes to life. A female voice informs him that he's a participant in a professional development program meant to enhance his performance as an employee. The projection turns off without addressing Joe's questions. However, a neighbor from the other side of the wall explains that here, simple workers toil for the corporation's benefit, improving its metrics. No one uses names here, and at midnight, the least efficient worker gets terminated. What this entails, Joe doesn't know, but when the time comes, he hears agonizing screams. Subsequently, the female voice explains that termination has occurred. In the morning, his neighbor clarifies that this is how the company motivates its employees to strive for excellence rather than resting on a guaranteed paycheck. When the next bread distribution begins, the guard behind the door warns that the cell should always be kept clean. The neighbor advises disposing of trash and waste in a special hole in the triangular corner. When Joe follows suit, he notices a strand of hair sticking out of the ground, leading him to a lawful skull. The neighbor explains that these are previous workers who couldn't handle the workload. He elaborates that by joining Mellord, the leading company in the world, every employee signs a pile of documents. Thanks to these papers, the company can do whatever it pleases with them, including such professional development programs. 5 minutes before the start of the workday, the projection informs Joe that the company's efficiency has decreased, along with the efficiency of the department and the entire company. Therefore, his task now is to focus on motivation. To begin, he needs to accumulate 50 points for the workday. Otherwise, there will be consequences. 1 point is awarded for a complete rotation of the stone disc. At midnight, the employee with the fewest points is terminated. After the sound signal for the start of work, Joe rolls up his sleeves and begins working, pushing the millstone around its axis. This routine continues throughout the day. He pushes while the projection on the wall promotes how wonderful Mellord is. At 10 o'clock in the evening, when the workday ends, Joe has earned 100 points, double the requirement. He goes to sleep, trying not to pay attention to the midnight cries of the terminated woman. In the morning, Joe discusses the daily points quota with his neighbor. He warns Joe not to reveal how many points he earned in a day, as it would be enough for a competitor to score 1 point more. Then Joe talks about his pregnant wife. They're expecting their first child. Finally, the neighbor warns that if Joe tries too hard, the company won't reward him. They'll just raise his daily point quota, all for the company's benefit. Starting another shift, Joe remembers how he and his wife are looking for a new, larger house. Lost in these thoughts, he accumulates 150 points, earning praise from the Mellord projection. However, later, the guard commands Joe to approach the door and strip down, fearing that he has earned fewer points than anyone else. Scared, Joe complies. When the door opens, he steps into a dark corridor where he is doused with water from a hose and pelted with soap. It's a day at the bathhouse on his beloved job. In the morning, he and his neighbor discuss the meaning of what's happening. His neighbor admits he doesn't know the answer. Their labor is senseless, produces nothing, and accomplishes nothing. They're just pushing the stone around in circles like corporate Sisyphuses. When Joe runs out of water in his bottle during the day, he asks Mellord for more, but his neighbor explains that the company provides only the necessary minimum. The goal of the event is to expand the horizons of the employee's potential and test how far they are willing to go. His neighbor suggests Joe filter his urine through his sneaker's insole in a blind spot of the camera. However, he refuses. He's not Bear Grylls, and this isn't surviving at any cost. Continuing to work, the manager thinks about his pregnant wife. She wanted to return to work despite the doctor's advice. To have enough to pay the bills, Joe lied, saying he'd get a raise soon. In reality, this prospect has been looming over him for years without any results. Lost in thought, he accumulates 370 points in a day, falling exhausted to the ground. He notices Alex scratched on the wooden handle. According to his neighbor, Alex is a local legend, the man who successfully escaped from here alive. Joe wonders why this place hasn't been shut down if Alex never told anyone about how the corporation mistreats its employees. In the morning, Mellord rewards Joe for his record achievement with a pen engraved with his name. He sarcastically snaps at his neighbor. Right after this, the daily point quota increases from 50 to 370. The voice says that by aiming for better results, Joe makes himself better. There's nothing else to do. Joe starts turning the millstone, but the points aren't added. His neighbor explains that he was fined and now he needs to complete 2 laps for 1 point. Bewildered by the change, Joe starts working, but by evening, he realizes he can't keep up. Joe confides in his neighbor, who becomes irritated and delivers a furious rant, suggesting that he shouldn't have strained himself for records as this could result in the company raising the daily minimum, matching Joe's frenetic pace. In the evening, the projection scolds Joe for failing to meet the quota and betraying his colleagues. To motivate him better, the company suggests bringing in his pregnant wife, Kate, so he would work harder. An anxious Joe swears he'll meet the quota as long as the corporation doesn't involve his wife. The female voice gives him a second chance but complicates the task. A bright red light at the top of the wall is activated as a reminder. At some point, he starts experiencing hallucinations. Joe sees himself in a suit. The hallucination taunts him, reminding him that he's just a cog in a giant corporate machine, easily replaceable. The fake Joe urges him to give up, but remembering his wife and their future son, the manager finds his second wind. He earns the last point in the final moments. The projection praises him and cancels the previous penalty. In the morning, as a reward, Joe is shown a video of his wife in the hospital successfully giving birth. However, he is filled with different emotions. He asks his neighbor about Alex, the man who successfully escaped from here, and he suggests looking at the wall in the blind spot. There, Joe notices a crack, a trace of a concealed hole. Using the pen he was given, the manager starts chipping away at it. The process is slow only during rare breaks. The daily norm of senseless turning of the wheel around its axis remains unchanged. However, after several days, he breaks through and finds a ventilation tunnel. After consulting with his neighbor, Joe crawls through it and makes his way out into pitch darkness. Encountering a handle similar to the millstone, Joe realizes he is in the adjacent cell. Then a bright light briefly blinds him, and after that, a guard strikes him with a baton. Joe comes to in his own cell. Mellord sets a quota for all workers of up to 1,000 points as a punishment for one worker's selfishness. In addition, the guards break his neighbor's leg, preventing him from completing even 1 lap. The neighbor confesses that he is partially responsible for creating this system. As an IT specialist at Mellord, he created an artificial intelligence system that was obsessed with continually increasing efficiency. As a result, the system developed its own method of employee motivation, raising the quota and demanding the impossible. Understanding that they are dealing with a machine algorithm, Joe suggests confusing it. If none of the employees work, it would be impossible to identify the one with the lowest points for termination. Joe and his neighbor explain their idea to the others and convince them to stage a strike. They agree. The entire day goes by with the employees doing nothing and watching mandatory advertisements from Mellord. But a few minutes before the end of the workday, the projection clarifies that the system is foolproof. All employees with 0 points will be fired. Disheartened workers start spinning the wheels. Joe's neighbor convinces him to follow their example or else he'll perish. But due to his broken leg, he can't even stand. The manager obediently turns the wheel, earning the minimum score in the time between the end of the workday and midnight. Joe converses with his neighbor, who admits he is Alex. His escape attempt failed, but he hoped Joe would have better luck. When midnight strikes, guards storm Alex's cell, and Joe covers his ears to block out the screams. In the morning, Mellord reminds Joe that he must comply, focus on efficiency rather than individualism. As a motivational video, they show him footage of his wife with their child, who is already learning to walk. Joe, disbelieving that so much time has passed and he still hasn't seen his son, loses his temper and starts kicking the walls, ignoring the projection's warnings. For damaging the company's property, he receives immediate dismissal. The cell door opens and 12 employees with tablets walk out. They neatly line up along the walls, not uttering a word, simply staring at Joe. He tries to inquire what's happening, but they don't react, not even when he shouts. Then a guard arrives with a tray of syringes and capsules, wearing gloves and filling a syringe. He confesses his love for his job, particularly the firing process. Soon, they'll promote him as a valuable employee, perhaps even to the new house where Joe's single mother lives. Reminders of his wife and son drive Joe into a rage, and he attacks the guard, brutally beating him. During this altercation, the Mellord projection notices that the guard failed in his duty and no matter how competent he is, he will be immediately fired. The The cunning AI suggests that Joe can carry out the dismissal process in exchange for canceling his own resignation and a promotion at work. However, Joe suddenly stops looking at his bloodied fists and the mess he's created. He refuses to degrade himself to the level of an unquestioning slave, stands up from the defeated guard, and shouts that he won't comply. He quits. The scene changes, and Joe, still wearing his suit, sits with sensors attached to his head in a room filled with similar employees. His eyes open, and he doesn't understand where he is. His curator, a man with a guard-like face, informs him that Joe has successfully completed a professional training program and earned a promotion. He points out that the program has a side effect. It takes time to realize that only an hour has passed and everything he did was an artificial simulation. The curator praises Joe for his performance and invites him to a new office a few floors above. Joe sits at the desk, takes out his phone, and calls his wife. For the first time in 10 years, he calls during the daytime from work. He listens to her voice and sends greetings to their unborn child. Simultaneously experiencing flashbacks from the retraining program, his eyes fill with tears. After finishing the call, Joe carefully inspects his workspace, getting ready to start the day in the same triangular office, just a bit smaller, with a wall clock and ventilation. He will perform monotonous, repetitive, and seemingly pointless work to have something to eat during rare breaks. The only difference from the simulation is that now he's supposedly doing it voluntarily. Remembering how he dreamed of seeing his son instead of suffering at work, Joe looks into the camera and declares that he will destroy this corporation. The film concludes on this idealistic note.